Welcome to this ValueBridge.net case study. This time we'll use the site's models to measure the drivers of equity value creation in a buy and build or roll-up strategy. This is where you start with a platform investment and then make several add-on or bolt-on acquisitions that increase the size of the business and hopefully create value. This will be the initial platform. It's a $200 million company that's funded with $140 of equity and $60 of debt, so its equity and debt ratios are 70% and 30% respectively. It has TTM revenue of 100, gross profit of 55, and EBITDA of 25. This makes its EBITDA margin 25%, gross profit margin 55%, and operating expense margin 30%. This last margin is equal to the company's SG&A divided by its revenue, and it's always equal to the gross profit margin minus the EBITDA margin. Finally, the valuation multiple is 8.0 from the $200 million enterprise value divided by $25 million of TTM EBITDA. This roll-up includes 4 add-on acquisitions, which have the following enterprise valuations and financial metrics. The general idea is that these acquired companies are not as valuable or well-run as the private equity-backed platform, but we can improve them through integration into a larger, more efficient, and more competitive entity. For example, the add-on financials are worse, with lower EBITDA margins, lower gross profit margins, and higher operating expense margins. But we have the opportunity to fix that through economies of scale. Overhead reductions and purchasing discounts can create cost synergies, and shared resources and centralizing offices can create operational efficiencies. We should also experience some multiple arbitrage, since smaller add-ons usually have lower valuations compared to larger and more established companies, as we see here. And also, over time, we might also generate some revenue synergies, some increased market power, and lower costs of capital. Now, the first thing we need to do is establish our value creation starting point. It's not just the platform investment metrics on the left, but a combination of all 5 of these acquisitions. And for that, we need to know how each deal is financed. For add-on number 1, we'll borrow $20 million because the platform has plenty of debt capacity. For the second, we'll use $10 million of cash on the platform's balance sheet. Mathematically, that works exactly the same as debt financing. For number 3, shareholders will invest another $10 million of equity into the deal. And for number 4, we'll finance it with 10 of equity, 10 of debt, and 5 of cash, which looks like this. Now, the secret to properly combining these businesses is ignoring most of the numbers on this table and only focusing on the independent variables, which are the equity and debt numbers, revenue, gross profit, and EBITDA. For each independent variable, we can simply add across the row as follows, and these 5 numbers will give us the other 7 that we need. Equity and debt sum to the total enterprise valuation of $265 and also give us blended equity and debt ratios of about 60-40. The consolidated income statement gives us our starting margins, and 265 over 37 of TTM EBITDA provides us our blended acquisition multiple of 7.16. This is going to be our value creation starting point, and our ending point is going to be when we ultimately sell this business for $400 million. Prior to exit, we pay down the company's net debt to $80, so this leaves us with equity proceeds of $320 million. This is a 2x return on the $160 million of total equity that was invested in the initial platform and in the third and fourth add-on acquisitions. Now, to calculate what drove value in this buy and build strategy, we only need the 2 columns that are on the right. First, we measure the absolute change in each metric, and then we take the average of the entry and exit value, and then we can plug these numbers into the value creation equations that we have already discussed extensively. $27.1 million of equity value creation comes from the $20 million increase in revenue. $16.9 million of gross margin expansion represents relative improvements in variable costs. $11 million of operating margin reduction represents relative improvements in fixed costs. $39.8 million comes from expanding the valuation multiple from 7.16 to 8.51. $40.2 million comes from gearing, which is how debt on the balance sheet has amplified equity gains, and $25 million comes from the company paying down debt over the hold. These 6 value drivers add up to 160, which precisely bridges the gap between the invested equity of 160 and the realized equity of 320. Now, as far as I'm concerned, if you make it to this point, you're basically done, but many analysts want to take this a little bit further and ask, okay, how much of this value came from organic growth and how much came from M&A? To that, I usually respond, why does it matter? The first column is everything you bought. The second column is what you sold. And these equations give us the most accurate explanation of what happened in between. So like I said, we're done, right? Well, I know that some of the academic and industry studies do make some kind of breakout of organic and inorganic components, so I want to show you how we could do that in this framework if we're careful. Let's go back to the acquisitions and ask what value would have been generated if the combined businesses could immediately start operating at the original platform company's level. So we make the margins 25%, 55%, and 30% like they are on the left. Then, assuming we keep revenue at 160, gross profit would increase to 88 and EBITDA would increase to 40. If we kept the valuation multiple fixed at 8.0, the enterprise valuation would increase to 320. And if we hold net debt constant at 105, total equity would increase to 215, and we would have the following equity and debt ratios. This is a hypothetical platform baseline, and we could measure equity value creation from entry to this baseline exactly as we did before. Now, this is an imperfect but potentially meaningful measurement of how much equity value comes from M&A. And it specifies the value that comes from relative improvements in cost of goods sold, relative improvements in SG&A, and expansion of the blended valuation multiple from 7.16 to 8.0. Because these three value drivers increase the company's enterprise valuation to 55, they also cause another $20 million of equity value creation through gearing. And just like before, the four value drivers bridge the gap between the $160 million of invested equity and the hypothetical platform baseline equity of $215. However, this is only step one. To complete the model, we must also measure value creation from the hypothetical baseline to the exit, as follows. In step 2, we see that we make a little more improvement in the company's margins and create $16 million of value by expanding the valuation multiple from 8.0 to 8.51. Revenue growth leads to another $31 million of equity value creation, and these organic enterprise valuation gains lead to another $21 million of gearing. Finally, company cash flows generate $25 million of equity. And again, these value drivers bridge the gap between the hypothetical platform baseline equity of $215 and the actual realized equity proceeds of $320 million. Alright, to complete the picture, we can put these two value bridges side by side. On the left, the organic or M&A step accounts for about 35% of equity value creation, and on the right, the organic or operational step counts for about 65% of equity value creation. And if we combine all the little bars in these two charts, we'll get one consolidated value bridge that looks like this. And it is practically identical to our first example where we calculated all these value drivers in one step. So in this case, all the value drivers look reasonable and all the numbers add up to the right totals. It suggests that our hypothetical platform baseline is probably a good proxy for reality. But the way we set that up was pretty subjective, and other choices could have given us quite different results. For example, note that our value creation models really don't care about the order in which the roll-up investments are made. We can swap the big platform investment with the last add-on acquisition, and this has no effect on the combined entry metrics or on the value drivers calculated in the one-step model. However, if we use add-on number 4 to define the hypothetical platform baseline, we'll actually lose value in the first step, and then be forced to make up for that loss with extra value creation in step 2. This is what the value bridges for both steps would look like, and while they do eventually add up to the correct number in the end, I think that most of us would agree that this appears to be an artificial and kind of meaningless representation of how value was created in the deal. So in my opinion, I think it's best to just look at total equity value creation from the consolidated entry metrics to exit. But if you really want to split value into these organic and inorganic cohorts, you can do it. Just be careful, because your choice of the hypothetical platform baseline is subjective and can sometimes lead to nonsensical results. I hope that you found this helpful. Make sure to check out the case study page at valuebridge.net, where I lay out all the math and provide a Microsoft Excel template for download. Don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.